guide their steps by the light of thy knowledge, O my God, and cheer their hearts by thy love, for verily thou art their helper and their Lord. Oh my God, oh my God, ooh.
Thank you, Elisa. I must say your music is beautiful, but so are you and your guitar. So
And your guitar.
Beauty all around. Thank you for those lovely prayers. And welcome everyone. Thank you for coming. Hi, my neighbors, Pat and Sam. Hi, everyone. And my other cute neighbors, Nura and Nava, and their mom, and my Ruby buddies, April and Mallory, and everyone else who's also my friend. Thank you for being here. Such a wonderful day to come together as our Christian friends in the world are celebrating Easter, and we know the supreme sacrifice that Jesus the Christ offered to redeem the sins of all of humanity. And who would think, when he was on that cross, looking so humble and actually meek and puny, that very shortly, just within 300 years, his message would then be ringing through the countries of Europe, uniting them under the banner of this great religion. These people who used to be pagans, of course. It's just wonderful to see the power of God, and then, of course, his life-giving waters flooded the whole earth and covered Africa, Asia, South America. No point of the world was untouched by the revelation of Jesus. And truly, on Easter, the body of his lifeless cause, because at that time his disciples had lost their faith and their hope and even were doubting. But it was on Easter that the body of his cause was resurrected, and each one of these disciples had such a new zeal and a new energy within them to go out and proclaim the cause of Christ, and all met their own crucifixion and martyrdom in the most hideous of ways. So it's a very special day to be speaking to you about someone else who also underwent a lot of persecution because of religion, and that would be Tolstoy, as well as the prophet of the Baha'i faith, whose name is Baha'u'llah. My aunt in Italy recently passed away at the age of 97, my father's sister, and I was just there to, oh hi Pat, I didn't see you. And I was just there 3 weeks ago, emptying her apartment and taking care of her affairs, and of course I found many things that had to do with my grandfather, who happened to have the great privilege of meeting Tolstoy. And so today we'll talk a bit about all of that. Take off my watch to make sure. And then, do I have until 12, Susan? Is that it? Okay, great. And thank you, Fetchy, for being my tech guy. Okay, so we know Tolstoy as this, the wonderful writer who, as when I was a kid, I thought he looked like Rumpelstiltskin. He kind of still does. But anyway, I have great respect for this wonderful man. Tolstoy was born into an aristocratic family near Tula, Russia. And this family owned a huge estate called Yasnaya Polyana outside of Moscow, about an hour and a half drive today. He enjoyed many of the privileges that aristocratic people did, and sadly spent most of his early adulthood drinking, gambling, and doing other things that went along with that, like all the time. So his brother finally talked him into joining the army, hoping that this would improve Tolstoy's kind of path along life. He did join the army, the Caucasian Army, in 1852, and actually went to war. And it was during that time that he indeed was very overcome by death and suffering. And it was when the seeds of conscientious objection that he later professed to the world, the seeds of nonviolence started to be planted in his mind and his heart. At 34 years old, he marries the vivacious, beautiful Sophia Behrs. This is in 1862. She became his editor, his greatest fan. She helped him to actually sell his books. She was his critic, his reader, as well as his agent. Tolstoy at this time was the master of Yasnaya Polyana, and that name means bright meadow. And it's a 4,000-acre estate, and he owned 300 serfs, and again, about 130 miles south of Moscow. In Tolstoy's family, the youngest male always inherited the land, and he was the youngest of 4 brothers. He went on to write 2 books. One was War and Peace, and again, a lot of this book was taken from his experiences in the army, and of course, many of you may have read this big, wonderful book, Alan perhaps. And he was, at that time, thinking so deeply about these questions of good and evil, love, hope, despair, cowardice, courage. And in this book, we see these contradictions being played out through the life of 3 people. And it was against the epic backdrop of Russia's war with Napoleon. Tolstoy and his wife, Sophia, had 13 children. 10 survived childhood, but a few more died in adulthood. So they just had 8 at the end. But he seemed to be a rather devoted father. And there are many, many pictures. I had a ton here, but I had to take them out because of time. With him and his family, with his grandchildren. And in one of his interviews with his daughter, Alexandra, which was the last child of Tolstoy's to be alive, who lived in New York City area, she was talking about how he would pick them up as children, stuff them in a big basket, and run around the house and put them in a dark room, and then they had to guess where they were as their eyes were closed all this time. So obviously he had this other part of him as well. This is the only picture of Tolstoy I could find, and I perused at least 300 with him smiling next to his wife. I just had to mention that. There's a reason for all this. Okay, and I'll go into that in a minute. So he also did other things aristocrats did, played tennis on his estate. He did a lot of horseback riding. Around the time that he finished his book, War and Peace, he started to go through a spiritual crisis and was feeling a lot of things, one of which was, how much land does one man need as he's sitting on his 4,000-acre estate? And he started to feel, I don't want to say guilty, but he started to feel maybe his true purpose in life was to be of service, and maybe it wasn't fair to have an aristocratic class and the peasantry. And so he was really considering freeing all of the serfs. And of course, his wife had married him as an aristocrat, so this started to cause a lot of problems for them. He also wished to give his copyrights to the poor people. And again, this was difficult for his wife, as I can understand. He had his spiritual resurrection, but she didn't have hers yet, and she was really managing the estate. He built a school for the serf children on his property, and this school was actually what birthed Montessori. And if you look into that, I didn't know that about the history of Montessori. And Tolstoy schools still do exist in Russia. When he had his spiritual crisis, he gave up all of his aristocratic clothing as well. He started to take out his own garbage, did a lot of his own laundry, just didn't want people waiting on him, wanted to feel, purposeful and feel like he was the common man. He wore these baggy shirts, the clothes that peasants wore, and then those clothes were called, especially the shirt, the Tolstovka, after him. He even made his own boots. Sounds like my son. He also threw in his hand and started working with the peasants on the estate, doing the farming, fishing, plowing. He loved the simple life. Of course, this didn't go so well with his wife, who married him again. He was a count, and she was from a high family as well. Anyway, he continued to pursue his path, and she continued to try and manage the affairs as best as she could. because then he did indeed free all of those 300 serfs that they owned. So now she had to pay people to come and work the property, which was a big deal. And we're talking about, you know, the late 1800s and early 1900s when all the aristocrats in Russia had serfs. No one freed them. Tolstoy believed so strongly in nonviolence, and in fact, when he read the Bible, in his mind, he distilled everything from the Bible, and he said it meant that we should accept whatever oppression and persecution comes to us through nonviolence. Of course, he was one who inspired Gandhi, and our daughter lived in India for a year. We went to visit her, and many, many areas in New Delhi and other parts of India, you have Tolstoy Plaza, Tolstoy Park, Tolstoy Avenue. It's very interesting. He also inspired Martin Luther King in his movement of the civil rights, his nonviolent movement of the civil rights here in America. And in the 1960 in particular, after the Woolworth sit-ins in Greensboro, North Carolina, finally, the manager of the store, the Woolworth there, after losing, in our time, $1.5 million because of the sit-ins, it caused people not to come, it caused many things, it caused a loss of business. But the owner of that Woolworth asked 3 of his African-American employees to take off their uniforms, go dress regularly, and sit at the counter and be served. And that was the beginning of desegregation of Woolworth stores. And I know here in Nashville, too, some of our friends, Alice Walton and others who we've known through the years, were part of that sit-in movement here that helped to bring about civil rights. But of course, there's still a lot more to work on in that area. As Tolstoy was thinking about, again, these thoughts of peace and peace being the means to any end, he started to speak about the fact that no one should actually fight in an army. And so this really was very difficult for the government to accept. And Tolstoy also started to understand and feel in his own heart that the Russian Orthodox Church was stifling spirituality in Russia, in the people. And it was more about dogma, ritual, and outward structure than it was about spirituality, service, and personal transformation. And he started to talk about all these things, write about all these things, and it touched a nerve in the Russian people. Especially, you know, they had been suffering for so long. And soon, therefore, he was excommunicated in 1901. And the excommunication of Tolstoy caused him to be an immediate sensation. In those days, we didn't have internet or TV, but his face was on all the Russian newspapers that he's been excommunicated. And this caused people to read it, and then he had more and more and more followers. As again, he was searching for the meaning of life, he began to, even though he had great reverence for the Christian faith, and indeed he felt that it satisfied him, he did begin searching about other faiths and learning about them. I want to say about his spiritual resurrection, I want to tell you a quote from him. And he says, quote, "I have lived 56 years, and with the exception of the last 14 years of my childhood, I was, for 35 years of my life, a nihilist, one who forgoes all religion. 5 years ago, I came to believe in the teachings of Christ, and suddenly the whole way of life changed. I ceased to wish for that which I had wished, and I began to desire things that up to that point I had not desired. That which previously seemed to me to be good now seemed bad, and what had seemed bad now seemed good. The idea of Christianity, divested of all its man-made dogmas and institutions, seemed to Tolstoy to be contrary to reason. And that is something that he was very possessed with, this thought, wanting to liberate the Christian faith from the orthodoxy of the church at that time. I just thought that was a beautiful quote as we saw this transformation of this man who, yes, used to do all these things as a young adult and then started to go into thinking about service and how to make his own life be one that was equalizing versus, authoritative and oppressive. And then I just thought that was beautiful. I wanted to share with you. So Tolstoy suggests that the church is the main obstacle in preventing man from practicing Christ's teachings. He taught passive acceptance of all violence. And this is when I was saying, therefore, it would lead to refusal to participate in any army. Tolstoy began to have correspondence with people from all over the world because they were reading about him, and they would write him, and he would eagerly write them back and ask them to send him their holy books. He asked for the holy book of Buddha, of Muhammad, of Zoroaster, and he read these with great thirst and seemed to understand the very essence of these religions, which up to that point were totally foreign to him. During this time, he also stumbled upon another religion, which would be my faith, the Baha'i faith. The poetess Isabella Grinevskaya was a Russian, and she was the author of the play The Bab, and she sends a copy of this to Tolstoy. The Bab was the herald of the prophet of the Baha'i faith, just as John the Baptist was the herald of Jesus the Christ. But the Bab also had his own religion, and in Iran, in a time, this was in 1844, where religious superstition and perversity of the monarchy, and again, extremes of wealth and poverty and abuse of the masses was going on, the Bab talks about, hey, we all need to love one another, and we have to understand that religion should be the source of unity and good and not the source of oppression. Tolstoy was very touched by the drama of this play because so many of the Bab's followers, about 20,000, were martyred in the most hideous of ways in Iran at the birth of this young religion. Then there was the German poet, Rainer Maria Rilke, who also sent Tolstoy a pamphlet on the Baha'i faith. And there was Hippolyte Dreyfus, the first French Baha'i ever, and he sent Tolstoy his book on the Baha'i faith. All of this began to spark Tolstoy's interest. As Tolstoy was reading these books and these different pamphlets that were coming his way from the Baha'i faith, as well as the books of the other faiths that he was searching, he realized that many of his inner convictions were ringing true with that of the Baha'i faith. One, for example, being the independent investigation of the truth. This resonated incredibly in Tolstoy's heart. Another is the harmony between science and religion. Tolstoy said everything needs to be understood by religion, by science, and even religion. The absence of clergy in the Baha'i faith appealed to Tolstoy. The absence of ritual and dogma. The elimination of the extremes of wealth and poverty, which is a foundational principle of the Baha'i faith. This is what Tolstoy was all about. Universal education for all, especially children. He had started that on his own property. Equality of women and men. Tolstoy was very, complimentary of his daughter's academic advancement. And he had, like, two of his daughters were his chief helpers in support as he was writing his many philosophies and such. And they were in his right hand. He had two right hands. The other thing that Tolstoy really, I think, impressed him from the Baha'i faith was the validity of world faiths and the fact that the Baha'i faith states that they all come from one source and they share a common purpose, and that is the spiritualization of humanity, and that these religions are not spasmodic, occasional occurrences in the world. Rather, they are part of a continuous divine process between creator and creation to help elevate humanity. Just as in a school, there's this continuous process of taking the student from kindergarten to university. That even though the teachers may differ and the intensity of the lessons being offered may differ, the goal of educating these kids is the same, just as the goal of educating humanity is the same. So Tolstoy then began to think about the prophet Baha'u'llah, the prophet of the Baha'i faith, who, with his family, were incarcerated in this prison in Akka, Palestine, present-day Israel. Baha'u'llah was sent out from Iran as an exile and a prisoner in 1853, and he underwent 40 years of exile and imprisonment from Iran to Iraq to Turkey to Palestine, where he finally passed away in 1892. Baha'u'llah was a nobleman. He was from a family of great riches. Though he himself renounced those riches and spent his young adult life serving the poor in his country, he had no attachment nor wish or desire to be part of that kind of life, because the king of Iran even offered him a ministerial position, which he refused. But nonetheless, he gave all of that up for a life of persecution and oppression by the Iranian, which was Persian back then, and the Ottoman Empire. Baha'u'llah was officially a prisoner of the Ottoman Empire for the 40 years that he was out of Iran. And Tolstoy was intrigued by him. So we'll move a little bit from Tolstoy and go to this cute man. He's my grandfather. When I was a kid, we had this picture in our house, and I used to look at it and I used to cry because I never got to meet him. I was 7 years old, I never forget, and we'd go kiss him. And look how cute his little ears are. We thought he had the cutest ears, my sister and I. Anyway, with that little introduction, I want to introduce to you my respectable grandfather, Azizullah Jazab. He lived from 1838 to 1935. He was a merchant of Mashhad, and Haide right there is born in Mashhad, and he came from the Jewish fold into the Baha'i faith. He began to do business. He left school when he was 7 years old because some kid took his pencil and then he was trying to quarrel and get his pencil back, and another kid told that first kid, "Give back that Jew his pencil." And my grandfather said, "I'm not a Jew, I'm a Muslim," because at that time he was, we thought. And then the kid goes, "Yeah, well, go home and ask your mom." And so he scurried home. "Mom, am I a Muslim or a Jew?" And she goes, "Well, sweetheart, actually, what happened in this country is the government forced all Jews to be Muslims. So actually you are a Jew." And he was so horrified, he refused to go to school after the age of 7 because of that experience. Of course, he was taught at home and he learned to read and write and continued his education, but he became a very, very devout Jew. And from age of teenage years, he started to even wear a hair shirt so that he would be suffering all of his time, all of his life. He couldn't sleep at night because of the hair shirt. So then he would be saying prayers and such in Hebrew, which he learned, both to communicate and reading and writing. Since he left school early, he decided to, well, what should I do? He decided to be a little businessman, and he indeed became one. And you can see in the right corner, Mashhad is where he was born. And then he did a lot of business in Turkmenistan, which is up north in Russia. And then you can see how large Russia is. And my grandfather went on the Silk Route. This is the Silk Route, all the way to China. And he went on the Silk Route a whole bunch of times. I didn't know this till like 4 years ago when I was sitting with my aunt in Rome munching gelato. And she's telling me, well, he went to China. I'm like, he did? How? She goes, well, he always used to go. He did? You know, with a caravanserai. So indeed, he would go to China and bring back silks, silk cloth, and sell it in Iran and in India. He did a lot of his business in Bombay. This is a typical caravanserai. This is where all the camels lodge outside and the people are then inside. And it was a very treacherous route, both physically as well as you never knew if you were going to make it through. On one such occasion, and he spoke many languages, not like fluent, but he totally could converse and understand. On one such route, he heard the Turkmen people who were traveling with him, and they were the ones who were conducting the caravanserai, plotting to kill him, saying that, okay, when we get at the caravanserai in the night, he's sleeping all, and he just acted like he didn't understand anything. But as soon as they got to the place, he found some official who came to his protection. And this was no joking matter, because his brother was actually killed a few years earlier, suffocated by a pillow. And I read that account, and I was like, well, glad my grandfather didn't see that same fate. So because my grandfather had business in Russia and actually lived in Russia for extended periods of time, Abdu'l-Bahá, who was a son of the prophet of the Baha'i faith, asked my grandfather to visit Tolstoy and take him a message as well as some of the writings of the Baha'i faith. Abdu'l-Bahá was a prisoner and an exile from when he was 9 years old, and again because of his religion, because he was part of Baha'u'llah's family. Abdu'l-Bahá had received a letter from Tolstoy, and in it said, Tolstoy told him, I wish to write a book about Baha'u'llah, or at least about the Baha'i faith. So my grandfather heads out to visit Tolstoy after visiting Abdu'l-Bahá in Palestine. Of course, he goes on a train after getting through Palestine. And here let's stay on the train, because I wanted to read a little bit about the account of him visiting Tolstoy. So he says about Sunday he bought his train ticket, and he says he even tipped the person who he bought the train ticket from, and he sets off in the direction of Yasnaya Polyana, which is Count Leo Tolstoy's estate. This is my grandfather talking. Then on the train, he spoke to the conductor to tell him where he wanted to go. The conductor officially told me, you will not be permitted to enter Yasnaya Polyana, as it is strictly forbidden by the government, even for pupils, to visit Tolstoy. The train is not even allowed to stop at the station for any longer than a minute, and that is only to throw the mail bag over there. He said, I said very humbly, I'm an Iranian Baha'i, and I need to visit him to deal with certain spiritual matters. I have come a long way from Akka, eagerly for this purpose. The two conductors thought and consulted, and they were actually pupils of Tolstoy, and they said to me, there's no other solution than to let you alight, that means kind of jump off a slowing train, at the signal box. The signal box is not a station, but it's a box where the train tracks diverge. At the signal box. And then we'll send 1 or 2 people to fetch you once the train has left. I accepted and thanked them. When I alighted at the signal box, the night was cold and dark. This was September in 1902. The night was cold and dark. It was raining and snowing. It was so cold that I was shivering in spite of my fur coat. And it was so dark that if someone had made off with my suitcases, which were next to me, I wouldn't have even seen him. After a little more than half an hour, 2 people came and in a friendly manner took my suitcases, and we went together to the station. And then at the station, they warm up and he sleeps there in his sleeping bag. The next morning, he gets a horse and buggy, and they take off. It's called a droshky, toward Count Leo Tolstoy's dwelling. On my way, I encountered some of his people who were returning, some in a droshky, some on foot. And they said to me, don't go there, don't waste your time. The police will not let you through. But I carried on, and I arrived there. I got off. This is the entrance. I got off somewhere. I got off the droshky by the front door of the house and greeted the policemen in Russian. They asked me, why had I come? I replied, I'm an Iranian Baha'i. I have come to discuss spiritual and mystical matters with the Count. They answered, he's not allowed to have anyone visit him. So I humbly requested to ask someone from the house to come so I could transmit my message to that person. They accepted this. A few minutes later, a man came. I gathered it was Secretary Chertkov, also a philosopher. After a few questions and answers, and he was informed that I did come from Akka and from Abdu'l-Bahá, and I wished to transmit a message to Tolstoy. He went back into the house. He came back, and after consulting some time with the policemen and telling them that I had come from Akka in a long distance, to the house, they asked me if I wanted to rest, because the Count said that it had been a long journey for me. So I rested for 2 hours, meanwhile reading one of Tolstoy's books. Around noon, we went to another small house, and I saw Tolstoy was sitting on a chair. It was a special chair, as he had his legs stretched out because they gave him pain. They set the table for us. I said that not only I did not drink alcohol, but for the last 3 years, I had given up eating meat. Smiling, Tolstoy said that he too did not eat meat. He told the people to make the same food for myself, which was eggs, as he would have. Tolstoy then said, I wish to become informed of the Bahá'í and Baha'i teachings. I wished this on 3 occasions because I wanted to write something about them in my books. The last time I wished this was 12 days ago when I had some discussions with Secretary Chertkov. Then I replied that on 3 occasions I had undertaken journeys to Russia on behalf of Abdu'l-Bahá. The first time to give the teachings to the Prime Minister Kuropatin. At that occasion, I had learned it was forbidden to see you or visit you. The second time I came, I went to see General Kamarov, but I had to abandon the idea at that time too. But this time, the third time, I am in your presence, and it is precisely 12 days since I have left Akka, because Tolstoy, 12 days previous to this visit, had told Chertkov, I'd like to learn something about the Baha'i faith. Then Tolstoy said, well, we have a heart-to-heart telegram. And they talked and answered questions and asked questions and all this and all that. Tolstoy asked him about the teachings of the Baha'i faith. My grandfather answered, some of the laws are the unity of mankind, the unity of religions, the unity of language and systems of writing, the unity of races, the equality of rights between men and women, the abolition of national, religious, social, political, and economic prejudices, the education of boys and girls. Then he questioned me about the acceptance of the faith by non-Islamic nations. I replied, there are Baha'is in America, in Europe, as well as in Egypt at that time. I even told him about the house of worship that we had in Ashgabat, Turkmenistan, which was built in 1904, and that 4,000 Baha'i residents lived there. Tolstoy was surprised. Then I transmitted to him Abdu'l-Bahā's personal message. Abdu'l-Bahá said, quote, act that your name may leave a good memory in the world of religion. Many philosophers have come, and each one raising a flag, let's say 5 meters high. You have raised a flag 10 meters high. Therefore, immerse yourself in the ocean of unity so that you may remain confirmed eternally. And by this he meant ocean of unity, not to be feeling religion is exclusively someone's right. My second question to Tolstoy was, in the light of the information I have just given you, what is your opinion concerning Baha'u'llah? He raised his hands and replied, how could I deny him? I have wished to educate certain Russians, and I have been subjected to house arrest, with police installed everywhere in order to ensure that no one visits me. Obviously, this cause will conquer the whole world. I myself have already accepted Mohammed. Then he added, send me more writings. Then my grandfather tells him that he will put him in touch with Ali Akbar Nakhjavani, who is a Baha'i who lives in Russia. At the end, Tolstoy said, on my part, give my greetings and respect to your great master, Abdu'l-Bahá. And he said, I will write about this new religion in my books. After that, he gave me some photographs as well as books. I didn't find that at my aunt's house, but I don't know where those photographs and books are. So this was dated September 19th, 1902, that Tolstoy was visited by my grandfather. This is the birch forest on Tolstoy's estate. This is Tolstoy's actual house. This house was much larger, but because he gambled so much, a whole, like, 2/3 more was disassembled and taken to another estate. This was the editor or secretary that my grandfather met, Chertkov. Tolstoy's wife didn't like very much. These are some Baha'i writings in Persian calligraphy. These are originals, not by Baha'u'llah, but other Persian Baha'is. So typically, Baha'is would take to Tolstoy writings in Persian that would be translated in Russian in Russia. This is Dr. Yunus Khan, who was one of the people who contributed to Tolstoy's knowledge of the Baha'i faith. This was the gentleman Ali Akbar Nakhjavani, a Baha'i living in Russia, who then conducted lengthy correspondence with Tolstoy during the last 2 years of Tolstoy's life, who my grandfather put in connection with one another. This is the house of worship at Ashgabat, the one that the Baha'is built. Here girls were educated. Here there were meetings to upraise the standard of life for women, as well as devotional meetings for families. And it was a real community center of the town of Ashgabat. So we come to, again, Tolstoy and his wife, Sophia. So this is near the end of his life. Of course, they had their little wrangles and struggles. She was very worried that he would write negative things about him in her diary, in his diary. So she was always looking for his diaries. So one day he hid them in his boots. And that morning when he wakes up around 5 a.m., they're gone. So he knew that she had woken up in the middle of the night and took his diaries. And he couldn't take it anymore. He was 82 years old. He writes a farewell letter to her and leaves the house at 5 a.m. and goes to the doctor who lives on his estate and says, come on, we're leaving. They leave, they go to the coachman's house on the estate, then they go to the stable, get their buggy, and they go to the train station. And Tolstoy just wanted to leave. He had been wanting to leave for a long time, to live a life of simplicity, away from all of that. But on the train, because Tolstoy didn't have any money, and neither did the doctor, they had very little, and Tolstoy insisted they sat in third class, which was very, very smoky. Tolstoy started gasping. And because he couldn't get good breath, he went on the front of the train outside and stood there for 45 minutes in the cold night. It was October. And by the time they reached the city of Astapova, Tolstoy was very sick. And his doctor asked the station master, this is Count Tolstoy, is there anywhere for him to rest? And he took him immediately to his home and put him in his house. Very few people knew Tolstoy was there, and they wouldn't even allow the wife to come in because they knew she would be agitating. This is a picture of her looking through the window. It's kind of sad, but she does get to see him before he dies. This is the room in which Tolstoy passed away. This is him. He's not dead yet, but he's still talking and murmuring certain things. His wife then came in and kissed him on the forehead and kneeled on the floor and asked him, please, will you forgive me?
Oh, wow.
This was his funeral. He does pass away November 20th, 1910, at the age of 82. And his son says, his last words, legible words were, Seryosha, the truth. I love many things. I love all people. A few months, this is his grave on his estate. He said, I want no ceremony. Put me in an oak box and put me in that birch forest. A few months before he died, which was May of 1910, Tolstoy receives a visit from a neighbor, Matvey, who lived a long time in Persia. Tolstoy's doctor relates that when Matvey commented that the Baha'i movement was interesting, Tolstoy added, very profound. I know of no other so profound. Another time, Tolstoy, near the end of his life, said, we spend our lives trying to unlock the mystery of the universe, but there was a Turkish prisoner, Baha'u'llah, in Akka, Palestine, who had the key. So Tolstoy passes away. What about our other friend? So this is my grandfather, and I discovered this photo in my aunt's house a few years ago. as an old man pondering on his life. I was shocked to see him because he looked so different from the other photograph. Anyway, he was a very popular storyteller. What happened to him, he was trading in the city of Marv, Turkmenistan, when the Bolshevik Revolution overtook him in 1917. His factory where he ground wheat into flour was seized, and so was his trading house. He retired to Mashhad with nothing at his hometown. Now he was an old man, well-tried and well-tested. But he lived on until the summer of 1935 and passed away at the age of 94, and not even of old age. He was walking some of his guests outside in the evening on the patio, because Persians walk you out of the house as a form of courtesy, and he didn't see the drop of the patio, and he fell and hit his head on the concrete stone below. Anyway, isn't he adorable? He's so cute. So you might wonder, what about his family? This was my grandmother to the left, and then my father with the mustache, and my Aunt Tahira, who just passed away herself in 97. When my grandfather married my grandmother and they moved to Russia, indeed Abdu'l-Bahá sent this silk scarf to my grandmother as she was living in Russia. I discovered this 3 weeks ago. Something very precious to discover for our family, and it is hand-stitched. And this was some of their flatware, and it's everything about it is Russian. It's made in 1885, and I have it at my house. Anyway, so that same grandmother in 1957 who received the silk scarf, she then went on to become what we call pioneers, which is equivalent of Christian missionaries, except there's no funding. And she went to Milan, Italy, where her daughter, my aunt to the left, had already moved a few years before to help establish a Baha'i community. And this is the first local spiritual assembly of Milan, and these are our administrative bodies. They're elected democratically. And my grandmother had cancer at that time. She left Iran with cancer alone to join my aunt and became one of the first members of the Milan Spiritual Assembly. And then she died like 4 years later in her 60s. Quite a wonderful lady. And then this is my aunt, just to tell you, so what happened to Aziz Jazob's kids and what did they go on to do? So she formed very close relationships with the Vatican, which is not easy to do, especially if you're a Baha'i. And she delivered the promise of world peace, the Baha'i promise of world peace, to several of the cardinals, at least 3. These cardinals are really high people. These are the people that can become pope. This one was Francis Arinze, and she offered him this, and that is her husband holding the promise of world peace. I found so many correspondences of this cardinal to my aunt, at least 10, and one even talked about my daughter's artwork, which apparently my aunt had taken to give him or something. It's very sweet. And then there was my grandfather's son, which is my adorable dad, Amit Jazob, who became a doctor and took his family to Tunisia as a pioneer when I was 2 years old, and then came to America to get his specialty in surgery, and then took his family again in 1970 to the Republic of Zaire, which is now the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And my father worked for the local people, the people who could only pay with an egg or a chicken for surgery. But nonetheless, he was asked by the president of the country to serve him as well as his personal physician, a physician to his family. So my father didn't give up the egg and chicken job. He continued doing surgeries from morning till afternoon, and then served the president's family in the evening hours, and of course also traveled with them. So I just think it's interesting, both my dad and aunt seem to have taken something from their dear dad. So thank you for letting me share my thoughts on Tolstoy and the Baha'i faith with you all. And if there's any one question, I may be able to entertain it, and if not, we can close. Any one question?